When I think back to Borderlands 2, I don't just remember the cel-shaded wastelands of Pandora or the ridiculous shotguns that could fire rockets. I remember the exact friends I was with when we first booted it up, the nights we stayed awake until 3 AM because we swore just one more mission, and the way Handsome Jack's voice got under our skin. The first villain in a game I feel I genuinely hated. This game wasn't just another looter shooter, it was our looter shooter. Playing Borderlands 2 in 2012 felt like being part of something, a strange mix of crude humor, heartfelt character moments, and endless gunfights that made Pandora feel less like a hostile planet and more like a second home for gamers everywhere. When you revisit a game like Borderlands 2, it doesn't just feel like revisiting a world, it feels like revisiting a very specific moment in your own life. I can't separate Pandora's deserts, icy tundras, and neon-lit bandit hideouts from the memories of where I was when I first experienced them. For me, Borderlands 2 will always be tied to an Xbox 360, a Turtle Beach headset, and a group of friends who were just as obsessed with the game's mix of loot and laughter as I was. Looking back more than a decade later, it's impossible not to see Borderlands 2 as more than just a sequel. It was a moment in time for some of us, and arguably the point where the series became iconic. The original Borderlands was a sleeper hit, the kind of game people stumbled into and fell in love with, because it was weird, bold, and unlike much else at the time, it felt new and fresh. Sure, it had its problems, but it was fun. It mixed Diablo-style loot obsession with first-person shooting, all wrapped in a cel-shaded Mad Max-inspired world. But Borderlands 2? That's the one that elevated the formula. It didn't just expand the scope of the first, it refined it, polished it, and gave it a story and a villain that still resonate today. Booting up Borderlands 2 again in 2025 feels strangely comforting. The world of games has changed so much, looter shooters are now everywhere. From Destiny to The Division to Outriders, live service models dominate and fail on a weekly basis. Battle passes and microtransactions are the norm, but when Borderlands 2 launched in 2012, the idea of grinding for loot with friends in a first-person shooter still felt fresh, even revolutionary. It wasn't trying to get you to log in every day for dailies, it wasn't trying to sell you cosmetics, it just wanted you to have fun, blowing up bandits, collecting absurdly designed weapons, and laughing at dialogue that was equal parts crass and clever and flat out stupid. And then of course, there was Handsome Jack. Every great game needs a villain, but few games have ever given us one as unforgettable as Jack. From the very first time you hear his smug voice coming through the Echo device, you know you're dealing with someone different. He wasn't a faceless alien, a generic warlord, or some overblown cosmic god. He was a corporate psychopath who made you laugh while making your blood boil. Jack wasn't just an obstacle. He was a character who stole the show. A villain so compelling that he practically carried the game's story on his back and hasn't been beaten as the best Borderlands villain to this day. What really sticks with me though is how Borderlands 2 balanced its absurd comedy with moments of surprising emotional weight. One minute, you'd be laughing at a quest involving a beautiful idiot of a robot named Claptrap throwing himself a birthday party, and the next, you'd be dealing with the aftermath of a major character's death. It was a game unafraid to be ridiculous, but also unafraid to hit hard when it wanted to. That combination is what made it feel different from so many other shooters at the time. When I return to Borderlands 2 now, it's not just nostalgia that makes it special. It's the realization that this game genuinely shaped the genre. The way it handled loot, co-op, and progression laid the groundwork for so many other titles. And yet it also feels like a relic of a time when games were less burdened by the weight of constant updates and player retention strategies. Borderlands 2 was a complete package when it launched, and it only got better with its DLCs. But before diving into all that, I want to take a step back to the moment before Pandora became a household name, to the time when Borderlands 2 wasn't yet a phenomenon, but just a highly anticipated sequel. Because understanding why this game mattered means remembering the hype, the expectations, and the way Gearbox managed to deliver on both. I still remember the day the first teaser trailer for Borderlands 2 dropped. The trailer didn't need to reinvent the wheel, it simply showed off what people already loved. Bigger guns, crazier enemies, more chaos. But there was an attitude behind it, this self-awareness that said, yeah, we know you loved the first one. Here's the sequel, and we're going all in. The tagline was practically etched into the DNA of the series, bazillions of guns. And even though it was tongue-in-cheek, there was also an excitement to it. Because in a time where most shooters were trying to take themselves more seriously, I mean Call of Duty was in its Black Ops 2 era, Halo 4 was about to launch, here was a game that embraced the ridiculous. The build-up to Borderlands 2 was unlike anything I'd experienced before. The original game had become a sleeper success largely through word of mouth, friends recommending it to friends, Late night co-op sessions, jokes about Claptrap's dancing, it spread in a way that felt organic. Well, it did for me anyway, as I was in school at the time, so that probably helped. By the time Borderlands 2 was on the horizon though, it wasn't just another quirky shooter. It was a sequel with expectations. People weren't just curious this time, they were hungry. Could Gearbox capture lightning in a bottle twice? Could they improve on a formula that felt so fresh only 3 years earlier? For me, anticipation was half the fun. I remember trawling forums and YouTube channels, hungry for every scrap of information. Who were the new Vault Hunters? What new environments would we explore on Pandora? Would Claptrap be back? And if so, how obnoxious would he be this time? There was an electricity in the air, the kind of hype that only comes once in a while when you just know a sequel is about to become something bigger than the first. And when I finally got my hands on the game, that hype was justified almost immediately. The opening sequence of Borderlands 2 remains one of my favorite and one of the best introductions in any shooter. The train sequence sets the tone right away. You're not just another faceless mercenary wandering Pandora. You're part of a story now, a bigger conflict with a villain who immediately makes his presence known. Handsome Jack doesn't just appear later down the line, he's there from the very beginning, mocking you, taunting you, shaping the narrative in a way that felt so different from the original game's looser, more directionless story. I mean, do you even remember the name of the antagonist from the first game? I thought not. That opening also showed something else. Gearbox had learned from the original's pacing problems. Where Borderlands sometimes felt like it took way too long to get going, Borderlands 2 wasted no time. Within minutes, you're fighting new creatures, looting your first ridiculous guns, and hearing Jack's voice sneer in your ear. It immediately felt tighter, more confident, more polished, and way more engaging. And it set the tone for a game that would go on to dominate my free time for months. But beyond just mechanics and story beats, Borderlands 2 felt like it arrived at a very particular cultural moment in gaming. The early 2000s and 10s were defined by sequels, big budget, high stakes follow-ups to proven franchises. Call of Duty, Halo, Assassin's Creed, Mass Effect, and Uncharted were all riding high. Every year felt like a new blockbuster sequel season. Yet, what set Borderlands 2 apart was that it wasn't just bigger, it was weirder. In an era where so many shooters leaned into militaristic realism or sweeping cinematic gravitas, Borderlands 2 doubled down on irreverence, absurdity, and a sense of play. It had no interest in being taken seriously in the same way, and yet somehow its story hit harder than many of those so-called serious games. I'll admit my first impressions of Pandora in the sequel were tinged with familiarity. Wastes, bandit camps, loot chests, it was all very Borderlands. But the difference was in the details. The art direction was sharper, the color palette richer, brighter, the environments more varied, even the menus and HUD felt like they had been fine-tuned to be more intuitive. It was the same game, yes, but better in almost every conceivable way. And maybe that's the heart of why Borderlands 2 stuck with me. Sequels have a tricky job. Innovate too much and you risk alienating the fans who loved the first. Change too little and you end up with a glorified expansion. Borderlands 2 threaded the needle perfectly in my opinion. It knew exactly what people wanted more of, but it also knew what needed fixing. The humor was sharper, the loot system more rewarding, the co-op smoother, the villain unforgettable. It was, in so many ways, the perfect sequel. Of course, I didn't realize that immediately. At first, all I knew was that I was hooked. I found myself staying up all hours of the night with friends, farming bosses for loot drops, debating which skill trees to spec into, laughing at jokes that probably shouldn't have been as funny as they were, but hey, I was young stupid, so it was all funny. It wasn't just a game to me, it was a ritual. And for a while, it was the centerpiece of my gaming life. Looking back, the nostalgia hits hard, but even setting nostalgia aside, Borderlands 2 holds up. Booting it up today feels surprisingly modern, even after a decade of looter shooters trying to replicate its success. There's a timelessness to its style, its humor, and its core loop of shooting and looting that keeps it from feeling dated. So as I sit down to write this review, I'm not just analyzing a game, I'm revisiting a world, a time, and a set of memories that are inseparable from who I was when I first played it. And that's what makes Borderlands 2 so special, not just as a piece of game design, but as a shared experience that defined a generation of players just like me. If there's one thing that separates Borderlands 2 from its predecessor more than anything else, it's the storytelling. The original Borderlands had charm, sure it had Claptrap, it had that cel-shaded flair, and it had a loot system that made it addictive, but story wasn't its strong suit. If anything, the narrative of the first game was little more than a framework. Go here, shoot this, maybe open a vault. The characters were mostly quest dispensers, the villain was non-existent until the last 5 minutes, and the big payoff was famously underwhelming. Borderlands 2, on the other hand, took that weakness and turned it into its greatest strength. Suddenly, Pandora wasn't just a wacky desert wasteland filled with bandits. It was a place with stakes, history, and characters you actually cared about, and at the center of it all was Handsome Jack. It's hard to overstate how important Jack was to the success of Borderlands 2. From the first moment he opens his mouth, he establishes himself as a different kind of antagonist. He's smug, he's charismatic, and he's funny sometimes, laugh out loud funny. But beneath the jokes and sarcasm, there's a genuine menace, one that could be quite scary. Jack wasn't just another video game boss waiting at the end of a campaign. He was a presence. He was in your ear constantly, reminding you that you were small, powerless, and ultimately playing his game. One of my favorite things about Jack is how human he feels. He's not an alien overlord or a faceless monster. He's a guy running a corporation, convinced he's the hero of the story, and willing to massacre anyone who gets in the way of his vision for Pandora. That complexity is what made him so compelling. You hated him, but you also couldn't wait to hear what he'd say next. His insults weren't generic, they were specific, personal, designed to get under your skin. And the fact that he was funny only made it worse, because sometimes you'd catch yourself laughing even as you loathed him. It's no exaggeration to say that Jack elevated the entire narrative. Without him, Borderlands 2 might have been just another fun loot game like the first. With him, it became a story worth remembering. He gave you a reason to keep pushing forward beyond just the promise of better guns. You weren't just playing for loot, you were playing to take this guy down. While Jack may have stolen the spotlight, the new roster of Vault Hunters also played a huge role in fleshing out the game's story. Salvador, Maya, Axton, and Zero weren't just blank slates like their predecessors. Sure, they still didn't have sprawling backstories delivered in cutscenes, but their personalities shone through in banter, voice lines, and interactions with the NPCs. Salvador was chaotic energy personified, the Gunzerker who could dual-wield ridiculous weapons and will laugh maniacally while doing it. Maya was the calm, confident siren, bringing a sense of gravitas and mystique. Axton was the pragmatic soldier, someone who felt grounded in contrast to the insanity around him. And then there was Zero, the assassin who spoke in cryptic haikus, adding an almost poetic flair to the chaos. He was the king of cool. What I loved was how Gearbox gave each of these characters a voice, not just literally, but narratively. When you played as them, you felt like you were embodying a character with a point of view, not just a silent gun-toting avatar. And when you replayed the game with a different Vault Hunter, the story subtly shifted. NPCs would react differently, banter would change, and you'd get new layers of characterization. It made Borderlands 2 feel more alive, more reactive than its predecessor, making the Vault Hunters feel more like characters than avatars. Then there were the side characters, many of whom became just as iconic as Jack. Claptrap, of course, was back, still equal parts lovable, obnoxious, and annoying. But this time, he wasn't the only source of humor. Characters like Tiny Tina, Ellie, Sir Hammerlock, and Mr. Torg added color to Pandora's world. Each brought their own brand of comedy, sometimes crude, sometimes ridiculous, sometimes surprisingly heartfelt. Tiny Tina, in particular, became a breakout star fan favorite. At first, she seemed like just another zany NPC, a teenage explosives expert with an over-the-top personality. But as the story unfolded, you began to see glimpses of depth behind the comedy, her eccentric behavior, masked trauma, loss, and loneliness. That balance of humor and tragedy was something Borderlands 2 pulled off remarkably well if you're paying attention. And then, of course, there were the returning faces. Lilith, Mordecai, Brick, and Roland, the Vault Hunter heroes from the first game who now stepped into mentor or supporting roles. Seeing them evolve and given more personality gave a sense of continuity, a reminder that this wasn't just a standalone adventure, but part of a larger saga, a larger world. And when one of them suffered or fell, it hit hard precisely because you journeyed with them before. One moment that stands out and still hits me even after multiple playthroughs, now spoiler alert here, if you have never played, and if you haven't, you need to, is the death of Roland. The first Vault Hunter I ever played as a character, I felt I had a connection to because of that. It comes almost out of nowhere, a gut punch in the middle of the chaos. It hits hard. In a game known for its humor and irreverence, that moment of sudden loss is brutal. Jack doesn't just kill Roland, he mocks the player for caring. It's storytelling that catches you off guard, because it reminds you that beneath the jokes and explosions, Pandora is a dangerous, tragic place. Characters die, sacrifices are made, People suffer under Jack's tyranny. That tonal whiplash could have been a disaster in less capable hands, but Gearbox somehow made it work. I've often thought about how rare it is for a game to make me laugh and then hit me with an emotional gut punch minutes later. Borderlands 2 did that better than most, and part of why it worked is because the humor made you care about the world. You bonded with these characters through laughter, so when tragedy struck, it actually meant something. If the story and characters gave Borderlands 2 its soul, then the gunplay and loot system were its beating heart. This was the part of the game that consumed me for hundreds of hours, the endless pursuit of better guns, the thrill of a random drop, the feeling that every chest could change the way I played. In a lot of ways, Borderlands 2 wasn't just about shooting enemies, it was about the never-ending cycle of looting, testing, discarding, and then looting some more. When Gearbox leaned into the tagline bazillions of guns, it sounded like marketing hyperbole, but once you started playing, you realized it wasn't an exaggeration, it was the truth. Every weapon you picked up felt like a combination of variables: manufacturer, stats, firing pattern, elemental effects, and sometimes just sheer absurdity. Guns weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they had personality. One of the biggest improvements over the first game was how Borderlands 2 handled its actual gunplay. The original Borderlands sometimes struggled with weight, and feedback guns could feel floaty, and combat encounters often boiled down to spraying bullets into spongy enemies. Borderlands 2 tightened everything. Weapons had more distinct identities, recoil patterns felt sharper, and the sounds were punchier. I remember the first time I picked up a Jacobs revolver. It kicked like a mule, with a booming crack that echoed across the desert. It felt powerful in a way that made me want to build an entire playstyle around it. Then I'd switch to a Malawan SMG and marvel at how it hissed with elemental energy, coating enemies in fire or acid until they melted into puddles. That kind of variety made the combat loop endlessly entertaining and fun. Enemies also felt better designed this time around. Psychos screamed as they charged, Bullymongs hurled chunks of ice, and Hyperion bots adjusted their shields dynamically. Each encounter was more than just bullet sponges, it was a chaotic playground where different weapons excelled in different situations, and because the game constantly showered you with new loot, you were encouraged to experiment, to swap guns mid-battle, to rethink your loadout every hour. Unlike games that lock rare loot behind predictable encounters, Borderlands 2 had an almost casino-like randomness. Sure, you could farm bosses for specific legendary drops, but sometimes the best guns came from a random chest in a forgotten corner of the map, or even from an ordinary bandit you killed by accident. That unpredictability kept every fight exciting. Even when I was grinding for hours, there was always that thought in the back of my mind, what if the next drop is the one? Legendary weapons became legendary not just because of their stats, but because of the stories attached to finding them. I'll never forget the first time I got the Hellfire SMG, a Malawan masterpiece that coated enemies in flames with ridiculous efficiency. It wasn't just a gun, it was the gun that defined my entire build for the next 20 hours. And when I eventually replaced it, it was with a mix of sadness and excitement, because that meant I had found something even more ridiculous. What really tied the loot system together was the way it interacted with the Vault Hunter's skill trees. Each character had multiple viable builds, and your weapon choices could dramatically change how those builds played out. Salvador could become a walking death machine with dual rocket launchers, shrugging off damage while laughing maniacally. Maya could control the battlefield with phase lock, synergizing perfectly with elemental Malawan weapons. Axon's turrets could be specs to become miniature fortresses, complementing long-range weapons like sniper rifles. Zero could vanish mid-battle, reappearing for devastating critical hits that rewarded precision. The synergy between loot and abilities made every playthrough feel unique. Even if I replayed the game with the same character, a different combination of guns and skills could make the experience feel fresh. That's part of why Borderlands 2 had such incredible longevity. It wasn't just about beating the story once. It was about experimenting, discovering, and pushing the limits of what each character could do with the right gear. Even today, when I boot up Borderlands 2, I find myself falling back into that same loop. Kill an enemy, pick up the gun, test it out, decide whether it stays or goes. The satisfaction of discovery hasn't faded, even after all these years. And that's the ultimate testament to the system's design. It wasn't just a gimmick, it was a core experience, and one that still feels as addictive in 2025 as it did in 2012. Reflecting on the game's legacy, I'm struck by how much Borderlands 2 influenced not just other games, but player expectations. We now expect loot-driven shooters to have depth, humor, and replayability, and much of that benchmark can be traced back to Gearbox's design choices. The combination of story, humor, loot, and co-op gameplay created a template that still inspires developers and delights players. Even beyond mechanics, Borderlands 2 remains culturally significant. Characters like Handsome Jack and Tiny Tina remain iconic, referenced in memes, fan art, and conventions. Players still obsess over farming runs, optimal builds, and hidden loot. The game didn't just launch, it embedded itself in the collective memory of gamers, shaping how we talk about co-op shooters and storytelling in interactive media. On a personal level, Borderlands 2 is more than nostalgia, it's a touchstone. It reminds me of the first time I got genuinely excited by a loot drop, the first boss fight that left me breathless, and the countless sessions laughing with friends as bullets and explosions rained down. It's chaotic, hilarious, sometimes ridiculous, and yet deeply satisfying. It's a game that knows exactly who it is and isn't afraid to embrace its quirks. And maybe that's why, after all these years, Pandora still calls me back. Borderlands 2 is a masterclass in blending gameplay, humor, and narrative into a single, unforgettable experience. It's not just a looter shooter, it's a personal world, a playground of chaos, and a testament to what video games can achieve when designers balance depth, personality, and fun. Even now, when I hear the first strains of that iconic soundtrack or see the first glimpse of a new loot beam, I'm transported back. Back to the deserts, the chaos, the laughter, and the excitement. That's the enduring magic of Borderlands 2, and it's why it will always hold a special place in my gaming life. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch. I really do appreciate it. Be sure to let me know down below which Borderlands game is your favorite, or just drop some of your favorite Borderlands. 2 memories. I'll be continuing my Borderlands reviews with 3 next in the lead up to 4. Again, thanks for watching, and if you feel like it, please subscribe and hit the like button, and be sure to check out oneupgames.com. And until next time, may all of your games be good ones.